Recently, Forbes adventure columnist Jim Clash and a group of experienced mountain climbers embarked on a climb through some of Greenland's peaks that have never before been explored. Jim sat down with pro climber Robert Anderson to talk about their successes.
We have Robert Anderson here, the expedition leader for the Greenland trip, and when we left, we had 3 goals. 1 was to be safe, 2 was to climb a mountain and name it Mount Forbes, and 3 was to have a good time. Robert, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
How do you think we did on those things?
Well, why don't we start with a good time? I think the most important thing is really having a great group of people. We had a good time out there. With the 6 people that were there, we had Jim, of course, we had Intisar Hyder, we had Eugene Kim, Laura Huey, and Christopher Heinz. So I think the way the people got on, the skiing we did mixed with the climbing, it was just all worked really well. We were very fortunate, I think, too, that there's some crevasse danger. The mountains out there are pretty steep. They're very low, and when you think of mountains being 4,000 feet tall, you think that's not much at all. But what they lack in the real elevation, they make up for in steepness. They're really quite steep when you get up there. So it was a good mix of all those things. And then we were all safe, and we came back and well tanned and pretty happy, I think.
Some of us more tan than others. Robert, I know we had a tense moment there with a possible polar bear sighting, and I know personally I was very, very scared. Tell me a little bit about that. Do you think it was a polar bear, and what actually happened?
Well, I've gotten the pictures back now, and I've looked at them, and it's still, we really can't tell whether it was a polar bear or not. I think as a guide, one of the things you're always looking at is the safety of your team. So you've got crevasses, you've got avalanches, you've got the weather, you've got the conditions, you've got the skills of the people. But it's something that I hadn't really faced before, is going out there and saying, what if we run into a polar bear? And we'd heard that nobody'd seen one in 18 years in this area. We did see tracks the day before.
Right.
But certainly, after we saw the animal in the yellow fur, and it came up and rolled around in our tracks some and then carried on up the mountain, it was so close that it's a lot different than seeing one in a zoo. And you suddenly, I think you go back to an almost primal nature of how are we going to escape this thing? How are we going to get away? And certainly after that, as you know, we carried the gun.
We took the gun everywhere we went. In fact, we had shooting practice at base camp. Now, we did not only just climbing, and we'll get to Mount Forbes after this, but we did some skiing, and for me, a lot of that was new, skiing with skins, and all the peaks we went to, we actually had to ski too before we took the skis off and used our crampons. But 2 members of the group actually did a ski descent from one of the peaks, and it was pretty steep terrain. Tell us about that, and to me, it was quite amazing they were able to ski that kind of steepness.
Yeah, it's quite a bit different than skiing at a normal ski area, of course, because the conditions aren't anywhere near what they would be. You've got a mix of crusted snow, ice, rocks underneath it, and in this case, it was also very steep. It was probably 55 degrees, and there wasn't any run out, really. You didn't want to fall down. So the one advantage is you can carry your skis up, but I think we had a new pair of boots, these lowest structura lights, which allowed us to have quite a good control over the skis. And so Eugene Kim and Chris Heinz were able to make the first ski descent of a peak we called Polar Bear Peak.
And we called it Polar Bear Peak because that was the peak we were climbing when we either saw the polar bear or we didn't. Okay, one thing I noticed as we went through the expedition, we progressively climbed higher and more difficult peaks, and that was a subtlety, I think, that I didn't realize you were doing, but it made me as a climber feel good because it took me a while to get used to the group, get used to how the group worked together, get used to the terrain. And so tell me how you decided to pick the different peaks and whatnot, and how we named them, and then culminating, of course, with Mount Forbes.
Right. Yeah, that was very much the logical progression that we took there. And it's just as you mentioned, it was an idea of getting the group to work together, to know how people climbed, to feel comfortable in crampons. Obviously, on the higher peaks, we were all roped up, and climbing with other people, you need to know and trust them and know how they're going to react in the different situations. And certainly, like the last peak when we climbed Mount Forbes, it was quite difficult. We had to climb it at night, so it was not dark, but quite a bit colder, and we had to keep moving all the time. So we had to have a real feel for the mountains and how everybody moved together.
The Mount Forbes peak, we climbed the south face, and the reason we climbed it at night was because it's never night up there at this time of year. The sun just goes around the horizon, and it's 24 hours of daylight. But the south face is what we climbed, was in the shadows, and there we have less avalanche danger, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we'd looked over there 2 days before, and we'd seen some quite large avalanches come down off of that face, and that was obviously during the day. It was loading up. It was getting very, very wet and sloppy. It was a bit above freezing, so with the intense sun, it got a lot heavier, and the snow sheared off the face. But that actually, when we went to climb it, made a good track at the bottom, and then it froze up quite hard at night. We started at 10 o'clock. were up there at
In the
about
evening. We started at 10 o'clock
10
in the
p.m. in the evening, and then we summited about between 2 and 3 in the morning, and then we came down, and so by that time it was really icy and hard, which is a lot better for climbing and a lot safer for avalanches.
When we got to the summit of the snow part, and we hit 70 degrees, I think, at some points on the snow, very, very steep. There was a rock pillar we had to climb. It was maybe 40 or 50 feet high, and we didn't know if we'd get to the top of that. So there was some uncertainty as whether we could get all the way to the top. How did you feel about that? Were you nervous that we might not be able to get to the top of that?
Well, that's one of the things that's so different about climbing a peak that's never been climbed before. You could get to the top, and certainly the peaks around there, the highest point is usually good rock, but it's pretty much straight up. And I did have a worry. Obviously, you go up this face and you're climbing this, and you really hope it's, that you can get up that last little bit. And when we got up there, we were able to kind of go around the pillar a little bit. So it wasn't overly difficult, but it was certainly vertical up there at the top, getting up those last 40 feet, some quite tricky rock climbing.
And normally on top of unclimbed peaks, we'll assemble and get a number of rocks for a cairn we'll put on the top. But this was so steep that we really couldn't put a cairn on top because there weren't enough little loose rocks. So the one thing we did do is I had my Keels hat, and I left it on the summit under a pretty big rock. Do you think that thing will survive the winter?
I think it might, although the winds up there, I suspect from some of the wind tunneling in the snow, are probably over 100, 150 miles an hour. So, but there's a Keels hat up there on top of Mount Forbes, at least for now.
Well, Robert, is anything else you want to say about the expedition? But I personally thought it was a great expedition. We did all the things we wanted to do. We were safe, we had fun, and we did climb a number of other peaks, right? There was Sophie Peak, there was Pappy Point, there was Keels Point, there was Polar Bear Peak, there was Mount Forbes. What else was there?
I think that was it. A few other smaller points. We climbed eight different peaks or points in kind of 10 days. So that was pretty good. I think one of the interesting things was what we did with the communications technology in order to run the website was linking Iridium phones to a Panasonic Toughbook and then out to both a Nikon digital camera, a Garmin GPS, and then powered it all through a Brunton solar panel. And that allowed us to run the communications. I think 15, 20 years ago, you'd go on these expeditions and you wouldn't talk to anybody, see anything, and nobody would know where you were, what you were doing. Whereas now, we could call home when we wanted and also put things up on the web. And I think along with that, we also had, of course, with the 24 hours daylight, we were assisted by Keels, which helped us out. And with that kind of sun, we had that on our faces. We had shampoo our hair, use the tonic. And also they use it to test some of their products. We had a hydration cream, which was quite popular, I think, because it's so cold and dry up there and it protects your skin from frostbite.
That was Jim Clash discussing his latest excursion to Greenland with fellow pro climber Robert Anderson. To check out more of Jim's adventures, you could log on to Forbes.com/adventure.